and welcome to the University Dwell podcast, where we talk about university life and more. And today with me, I have Napa, and we're going to be having a very interesting conversation. But I'd like to know, hi Napa, can you introduce yourself to us and tell us a bit about what you do?
Okay, so hi, my name is Napa.
What does Napa mean?
It's short for Chinapa, and that's short for Chinapife, but there's a story behind it. I didn't shorten it to become more funky.
Okay.
But I've worked for 25 plus years in global tech companies, leading high-performing sales teams, and now I use that knowledge to help startups, SMEs, and enterprises accelerate their sales. So it's been an interesting journey for me, for real.
Awesome. As a woman in STEM, do you think that the social, political realities of women, especially when we talk about the family and whatnot, is a factor that hinders women from going into STEM?
Yeah, it's such a nuanced question, right? Because when we think of the young girls that start doing sciences in secondary school, we would like to see more adoption there. And then moving from secondary school into university, I think we're still less than 20% of women in STEM, which isn't good. So I don't even think it's a balance issue. I think it's maybe exposing our girls to how exciting tech is much earlier in their journey, even as they start school. So seeing a lot of communities that are fostering a change to tech for women and supporting them and helping them, I think is really amazing, because even
absolutely.
So I think it's a balance. Make sure that young girls know as early as possible how amazing STEM is, and then supporting them through that. And then even for the women that maybe missed that opportunity at the start, finding a way into tech. So you see women that maybe started a career in HR, but now they're UI, UX designers, they're developers. So it's a very exciting time for women.
But what do you think, why do you think that representation is important, and not for the women, but for the industry in itself? Why do you think that representation of women is important?
So when you think of tech, technology really builds a lot of the products that shape our society today. So if we look at social media, for example, it's very difficult to remember a time that we didn't have all the social media platforms, but they did exist.
Of course.
Now, if you don't have women in the room when those products are being created, and not just women, like diverse viewpoints and perspectives, you probably will build a product that isn't fit for use for the whole population. So when we think of diversity in tech, it isn't just because we're trying to increase the number of women or the number of people that have certain abilities or lack of ability. We want to be able to build products that everybody can use.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the big things. And then the second thing is being able to solve problems that not only impact a specific part of the population. So when women are empowered in tech, they're able to solve some problems that might be unique to them,
to their realities.
Exactly, to their own reality. So the diversity isn't just because we're trying to push a female agenda. It's really to create products and solve problems that impact, the entire society.
Awesome. I absolutely agree. So funny enough, just leading up to the conversation I want us to have today, for my final year dissertation in school, my topic was the impact of the BBC Sex for Degrees documentary on sexual harassment. And it's very interesting. Apparently my mom said that when I was younger, it was my 3rd-year-old birthday, and I was just crying throughout. They were playing music and I was just crying. And then she came and she was like, oh no, that's not her song. And apparently my song that time was Mr. Lecturer. That immediately they played it, then the party started for me. And it was a very interesting topic for me. Today we want to talk about the Mr. Lecturer syndrome and if sexual harassment is a systemic thing, or do female students use it as a way to escape studying? I'd like to know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, and there's so many parts to that question,
Absolutely.
Right? So many parts. And I think the first part that we need to talk about is what is sexual harassment, right? Because if it is unwanted, it is a harassment.
Yeah.
If it is something that kind of would prevent you from maybe moving to the next level, then it is a problem. And I suffered this in university, right? And it was in my first year, and I was doing really well in school, and I was in engineering, and we were a tiny minority, right? And there was a particular lecturer that had, made some very unwanted advances to me. There wasn't a place I could report it. right? There wasn't anybody I could speak to. There were no tools, there were no resources.
guardrails.
There was nothing that, there was no education even as
Yeah.
you're entering university to say, look, if you
Experience
receive,
this
yes, this is how you
it.
handle it. So that in itself shows that it probably is a systemic issue.
Yeah.
If somebody that experiences it can't find help. And I remember we had done engineering math in first year, and I submitted my exam paper, and the lecturer was the one invigilating, and he said there was no point doing this because you're not going to pass. I remember that. I can never forget that statement. Because I am a Christian, you know, I got my friends and my family and we prayed about it. Unfortunately, he was moved away from that position. But there are many young girls
that
don't have
that
no,
experience.
they are in a position where he's saying, literally, you're
Yeah.
not going to graduate. Because if you fail engineering math, as of the time, that was in the curriculum when I was in school, in first year, you can't do 201 of engineering math. You can't do it in second year. And then you can't do it in third year. You know, so literally, this person is able to change the trajectory of your life. You know, imagine how that person feels. So that's why it's really important when we're talking about something so sensitive around sexual harassment to say, do female students use it as a way to get out of studying? It's almost like an oxymoron. Like those two things shouldn't be in the same sentence. We should just talk about the sexual harassment, unwanted sexual advances that could really change the course of somebody's life. It's such a huge thing. And imagine a young girl that is in that position.
Yeah.
Now the question is, what structures, what tools, what education do you need to put around her to be able to address that?
Yeah.
And then it comes back to our culture of female shaming.
Yeah.
You know, when something happens to a woman, the first thing they ask is,
What
what
were
was she
you doing?
wearing?
Where were you?
Where were
Yeah.
you? And all of that. That's not what we're talking about. We're saying put the structures in place. So somebody that gets unwanted sexual attention or harassment is able to make sure it's reported and then it's handled.
And addressed. That is very interesting. It's so funny because a while back I was on Instagram and I saw this video. It was of Osofia, and then there was this female student that walked into his office. I think she didn't really do well with her exams, and then she was trying to get to him, and he was like, are you crazy? Like, first of all, step back. Is it because of all these things you are brandishing in front of me that you think you're going to get what you want? And I think, let's even say and pretend that is the case. I think when we look at the power balance, more often than not, the age difference and what you would assume should be the maturity gap, I think the onus also falls on said lecturers to, as it were, stand for their values and not go in line with stuff like that. But let's take it back to the BBC Sex for Grades documentary. When the documentary came out, it was a very interesting time. Of course, there were lots of people peddling the stuff of these girls, that they put themselves out for the lecturers. I think another thing that I noticed that was very disheartening as well was that a lot of these students they're probably not up to the legal age. So they are probably 16, they're probably 17, because children enter schools at a very young age now, and then they are faced with this challenge. And more often than not, we may like to deny it, but they have to go along with said harassment and advances to get what they want.
On the 6th of June, 1859, Babington Macaulay started an initiative with financial support from James Davis, Daniel Taiwo, Moses Johnson, and a few others, opening the door for the many generations in Nigeria. What are you doing for posterity? How do you want to be remembered? High School Dwell, Back to Basics, starting July 5th, 2025.
So my question then would be, as a young girl now who's entering the university, how do I wouldn't particularly say protect myself, because you never know what attracts a predator, but how am I able to wiggle my way out of such situations?
And you've raised so many good points.
You
know, the power imbalance is a big one. So that's why we need to put structures in place that if a lecturer is faced with that situation, he is also protected, right? We need to put that in place. So it's not just to say sexual harassment from the lecturer. It can be towards the lecturer, because what that student is doing is also sexual harassment. And then making sure that if a lecturer does fall into whatever is being presented to him, there are consequences if it's found out, right? And then the second thing that's so interesting that you mentioned was social media. So social media is, because they're content creators that are creating content that people like to click on, there are lots of these sketches around women coming for favors and offering themselves, and people are beginning to think that's the reality, right? It's some of the cases, but not all of the cases.
Yeah.
So a young girl, again, a third point you raised that I really wanted to double click on was how you don't know what will attract a predator.
Yeah.
There is nothing. Whether a predator is a predator because they are a predator. They are predators. So you don't put the onus on yourself, right? Because what people will say is don't dress a certain way, but you see predators that take advantage of people that are covered in sackcloth, right? Yeah. So you don't think that way. What I really appreciate now is that there are advocacy groups. So it's to be able to, before you start school, know what advocacy groups are available to you. If you can do research, because what I find in university, when I was in university at least, is that most people know the lecturers that are a bit off.
Yes.
So kind of do some research to understand which lecturers are the ones that tend to work towards this or do these kind of things, and then make sure you have a strategy and a plan in place, right? But it's not to stop living your life because you don't want to attract a predator. A predator is a predator, and they have that tendency, and they are looking for every opportunity to exercise their right. But yeah, really important to make sure the lecturer is protected, because we've had cases where somebody will try something with the lecturer and they'll say no, and then the next thing you say that the lecturer raped you, and his reputation is destroyed, or her reputation is destroyed, and it impacts their career as well.
Yes.
So making sure that either party are able to report without fear of repercussions or retribution.
So I want you to take on the hat of the school. So you own a school and whatnot. It's very interesting that I find that, sometimes you think that there are some issues that are limited to public schools, but they aren't. I find that even in private schools, I don't know if I should tell, okay, I'm going to find a way to tell the story. So, like, even in private schools, you have these cases as well. So there was a time that there was this case in some school that I know, and they asked the lecturer to resign.
Okay.
And that is even probably one of the best things a school has done. More often than not, they, as it were, criminalize the girls or protect the teachers. So as a school owner, because at the end of the day, it's also a business and you are trying to protect your own brand image and your reputation, how do you suggest that when such cases happen, that they are handled in a way that, yes, you address the situation, but it also doesn't damage the reputation of your school?
So I am not a school owner because I understand that when you're in a business, giving advice from the inside is very different from looking from the outside.
Yes,
because absolutely. I would just look outside and say, you should do this, you should do that. I always believe that there are certain businesses where you cannot prioritize profits as the number one benchmark, right? And education is one, okay? But you're a going concern. So there's some aspects that you have to consider because you need to be able to pay bills and keep the school running. I think there's some things that you should have a zero tolerance for in a school. And one is sexual harassment, abuse. These are some of the things that zero tolerance. But even in that zero tolerance, you have to make sure that there is a way that there is an independent inquiry to make sure you gather the facts. Because we've had situations where you find out that maybe it wasn't the teacher's fault, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe it wasn't the student's fault, but you need to be able to gather that evidence. The thing is, once parents that are your primary customers know that you're going to prioritize their children, the safety of their children, and that there would be an independent investigation that will give them all the facts, it will actually increase your brand in market.
True.
This is just the truth, but it will take time. So maybe invest in brand messaging, but have that kind of character of the school, because every business is like an individual. You have a character to understand what is zero tolerance for you, and put things in place that gives your primary customers, your students, and then your employees, which are the teachers or the lecturers, the confidence that if something does happen to me,
you know that you would be...
Yes, to build that kind of character in your school.
Okay, so just final thoughts. I think a huge part of sexual harassment, abuse, and everything on that spectrum, like, is the mental trauma that comes with it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are lots of women and men probably dealing with that right now. How would you suggest that such people get help and healing?
Yeah. It's actually extremely traumatic.
Yes.
And there have been cases where people have not been able to deal with the trauma and have decided to exit the world. So I'm treating this with as much sensitivity as I can because it is such an open wound.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something I tell people. I say if you walk into a place and then there's a piece of iron metal and it cuts through your leg, immediately what do? It's bleeding. You rush to the hospital, they'll disinfect it, they'll stitch it up, they'll give you antibiotics. You go in for a check. Physical trauma is the same as emotional or mental trauma.
Yes.
You have a wound, right? And you need to fix it.
Not
So
cover it up.
you can't cover it up because it's festering, and sometimes you don't know how to fix it yourself. And unfortunately, for some of trauma victims, you may end up getting victim blamed,
Yes.
and you don't feel confident enough to share. There are places that deal with trauma after such incidents. But you do have to take the first step and reach out. And that is the challenge. So if anybody feels that they need to do that reaching out, look for a really good trauma center and start healing yourself. The same way that wound on your leg is going to take time and medication and support with checkups, that's the same way you're going to heal that mental or emotional trauma. So give yourself that time and go on the journey and know that in a few years you will be fine. But imagine if you leave that wound unfestered.
Fester.
Yeah, it just festers, it becomes infected, and suddenly...
worse. You probably have to cut off the leg.
you have to cut off the leg.
Thank you so much. This is a very disheartening conversation, just the overarching situation. But I'm also very excited that our society is slowly but surely getting to a place where we can have spaces to talk. We
Yeah.
can have places that we can go to get help, and I hope that people do get the help that they need. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you.
And that is all on this episode of the University Dual podcast. See you next time. Bye.